You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. We have a very big episode for you today with a wonderful guest, so let's get to it as quickly as possible. Our guest this episode is Feratu, someone who I deeply admire and am constantly impressed by the amount of work they're able to do and the incredible product that they are able to put out. Feratu is the creator of Goth in the Raw, which itself is a number of different things. Primarily, it's focused on animal rights and education around raw veganism. You can find the website at gothintheraw.com, and very soon you'll be able to find Goth in the Raw on TV as well. But they're also a musician, a model, the creator of Phantom magazine, a LGBTQIA+ activist, among many other things. It's 2022. It is the first episode of the year. We're heading into 8 years of Cemetery Confessions, and that's had me feeling a little nostalgic, thinking about where the show came from, where goth has been, where it might be going. On the first episode of the podcast, we covered an article about Kylie Jenner's goth look, and there was kind of parody to that recently, an article from The Guardian about how goth is becoming popular again. So it seems like we're going to be, in a few months, having a lot of black clothing make its way into the wardrobes of the general public. Or maybe it won't. Who knows? Maybe it's just a fashion publication thing. I don't know. But I do think over the last couple years, we've seen a lot of Gen Z playing with goth style in and out of the community. I think some people can think that kind of brings some headaches with it, like a lot of old is new again in terms of what people are talking about and arguing about. But I think there's been a lot of good as well. There's a lot of passion, which is always infectious, and it's been, for me, a delight to see the fashion experimentation. And I think the voices of goth are more diverse than they have been in the past. So I don't know how much reflecting or taking stock the two of you do at the end of the year, but I thought it might be a little appropriate to ask if you have any advice for like newer goths or veterans about interacting with each other going into the new year.
I do. I can go ahead into that.
Please.
Definitely to kind of wanting to piggyback on what you said about the Guardian issue. And then another one just came out recently where apparently gothcore is the new thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. I am a model. I've modeled in New York. I have done runway, and there are designers who are where you know that their core and their heart is this aesthetic and this subculture. So of course, Alexander McQueen, Gareth Pugh is another fashion designer, and I don't mind. I love to see when the culture and its fashion are introduced to new audiences. We seem to see that at least maybe 3 times a year, some of these articles. I think my biggest problem that I have is a celebrity will wear 2 pieces of black clothing and they immediately associate it with the culture. And I'm like, no, it's not making a comeback. It never went anywhere. That's where my irritation lies, because they do make it seem. And then to the younger people that are wanting to get into the aesthetic or to that fashion, unfortunately, you do have mass media or articles like this that set individuals who just like the color, and that's fine. But you can't say, just like you said with Kylie, now Courtney is wearing black and black and black because of Travis Barker, and then all of a sudden she's goth. It really does become very, very irritating. And this is not gatekeeping. This is not being an elitist within it. It's just like these articles are saying, oh, look, it's back. We who have been in the scene for years are like, it never went anywhere. And when we wear it, comments are made, always like a negative thing, or why are you wearing this? You shouldn't be doing it. And then someone can paint their nails, who sings a song or is big on TikTok, and boom, all of a sudden the culture is back. I think that those are like conflicting messages, and kind of like, it does kind of set me off. And it's been just kind of regurgitated several times last year, and now twice, and we just started January. So it's just like, oh my gosh. And then kind of touching base with what you said about the new and the elder goths and the new goths coming in. I've seen last year, 2021 was a lot of elitism, a lot of knocking of younger baby bats that are coming in. If you can't listen to this style of music, or you can't dress this, and don't buy Killstar, or you can't buy Upper, it has to be thrift. Yeah. I'm like, look, just like changing your hair is something that's fun to do and you get to experience and experiment, the same thing goes with goth fashion. I would say for newer goths, you don't have to spend $90 on a dress to be goth. You can thrift. You don't necessarily have to spend so much money. You really don't. And then for the older goths, teach instead of belittle. Kind of show them the way instead. I would like to see, and I haven't seen any, or maybe very little, luckily, the beginning of this year. But I mean, not trying to sound cliche, but maybe more lessons learned on both ends. There's a lot that elder goths can learn from the younger ones coming in, and the younger can learn from the older. Yep. That type of unity, less discord. It's overbearing and tiresome.
Completely agree with you. Trey, did you have any opinions on going into 2022?
Probably not any new opinions, but I certainly still have plenty of opinions on things like that. To kind of piggyback on what Nnaus A said, especially with the celebrities, the people who sing a song or on TikTok and wear a couple items of black. The thing that irks me the most about that is that it is usually it's a totally manufactured thing too. It's the news media or the fashion media, whichever, who are putting this goth moniker on them. It's not even the celebrities who are claiming most of the time to be goth or I'm doing a goth look or something like that. It's rarely any of them even doing anything like that. It's just some outside organization looking at them and jumping on the first little dark bandwagon of, oh, must be goth must be coming back. And I mean, that's always been one of my major bugaboos about goth identity and things like that, is this idea where it gets foisted on people rather than people claiming it for themselves. And I think that's more important, is that there needs to be an I want to be goth before you can really be considered goth. And that's both inside and outside the scene. I've had this debate with people around those goth godfathers who will swear up and down that they're not goth. And you know what? It's okay that they cannot be goth. Their music can inspire goth. Their aesthetic can inspire goth. They can be goth inspirations, but it's okay for them not to be goth. That's their choice. If that's how they want to live their life, then that's fine. And it's okay. And we can still like them, and we can still be influenced by them, and they can still be seminal aspects of our scene. And that attitude just needs to be extended all over the place, whether it's to people who are adopted insiders or outsiders who are being pigeonholed into this sort of goth thing that is a constant frustration for those of us on the inside who are saying they're not goth. And why are you saying they're goth? So yeah, there's a lot of things about identity. And I think that's where a lot of the crux of all these debates and arguments come from anyways, is this identity versus aesthetic versus commodification. All of these things get tied up together. And I think everybody just really kind of needs to take a step back, take a couple deep breaths, and realize that as a public-facing subculture, we're in the public eye. And so we can't hide behind the idea that we're some sort of secret society and people are infringing on our secret rights and rites of passage by just showing with these whatever aesthetic they want that is being claimed. And education is important, and having that dialogue is important, but it's not about the gatekeep. It's not about keeping the secret to ourselves. It's not feasible if we want to be a public facing subculture that wants to enact some change in the world. And that's, some of what we're trying to do with how we present ourselves and how we interact with the world, is trying to get ideas across about darkness and death and about, issues of mental health and issues of systemic problems in our society, and just the things that frustrated us and disgust us. And we are out there and being a voice for those things. And because of that, we're going to be shouted down. We're going to be attempted to be co-opted. It's just all part and parcel with the existence. So I think a lot of it's just about, as you've said before, goth is a discursive subculture. It's about having those conversations. When somebody's making a claim, it's not about gatekeeping and shouting them down and telling them they're stupid. It's about saying, well, why do you think that? What about that do you think is goth or is not goth? Why is that important to you? Or the idea of being goth if you don't like the music, or being goth if you don't like certain aspects of the aesthetic or the fashion or literature or cinema or whatever. What about those things attract you to it? And what about being attracted to that makes you feel you need to be goth or or even want to be goth? I mean, the question is why? Because it is a whole lifestyle. You can like elements of it without liking all of it. And you can like all of it without liking aspects of it sometimes too. So it's about having that conversation for newbies and old people alike. Just be patient with each other and have those conversations and learn about each other and help them learn about what you love in this thing that we all share.
Yeah.
I wonder, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
I kind of wanted to just piggyback on what Trey said. When Trey mentioned about learning and what we can learn from one another within this subculture that we're all part of, and the systemic aspect, and even asking people how they feel this way, just like you said with gatekeeping, it's rather why do you feel this way, or in regards to something within and about the music. And it hit on the head with me is that last year within the community, there was a lot of not welcoming people of color in the scene. Blacks don't belong, you don't belong here. I'm like, who gave you jurisdiction? It's that type of thing. To why do we have to prove? Why is it a subculture that we can't be part of? I don't associate this subculture with a race. There's no race card that you need to show that you can be a part of it. And that's something that really needs to end. It's tiresome, because then you have goths of color that are like, I don't go out in clubs anymore. I don't go to areas where there are gatherings, because they're made to feel small. It can sometimes not even be a look. It can be, not even words. It could be looks. It can be the actions of how people are around. And when you have that, you're like, I'd rather be in solitude. And it's hurtful. And that's where it takes representation across the board, seeing different faces within the subculture. I've heard it many times. And while it is hurtful to hear, I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere because I connect with it. And I have every right to be here, just as you do. There is no I have to be as white as snow to be goth. Not at all. And it blows my mind when I tell people there is a subculture, there's a goth subculture in Nigeria, where I'm from. There are articles in the New York Times did a paper on it and did an interview. They were like, are you serious? I'm like, it's not that far-fetched. Because the music connects all of us. And there are other aspects of the subculture that unite and people pick or they find a connection to. Normally it's first music, because that speaks those words. But just like you said, the coming together, having discussions, realizing that you don't hold this is not just yours. That irks me just as much as the fashion thing as well. So
and I think it takes a lot of white people with a platform talking about why goth needs to be explicitly anti-racist rather than just well, we're not racist. We need to be anti-racist. We need to break down what those associations of goth with whiteness are in these sort of ways that aren't really obvious, but are still, like you were saying, it's about the goth scene in Nigeria, how goth is so tied to England and then by extension, white people, right? And so it takes us talking about why bigotry won't be tolerated and why we specifically stand against that kind of thing to make goth into a space that's safe for everybody.
Yeah, it's particularly galling to me too, because at least for me and a lot of people I know who have gotten into goth, we got into it because we felt like outsiders in our own right. We were not part of whatever the community we grew up in. We felt like we were excised from that community. So we found this community of our own to become a part of, and to then see that community turn around and make others outsiders who are trying to become a part of it is really hard, because we had that refuge. But those people who are also, they're also outsiders. Almost everybody who gets into goth is an outsider from whatever their birth community is usually. So they're outsiders from their community, and we're making them outsiders of ours as well. And that just makes it doubly painful and just extra galling for me as a member of the community to see us doing that to anybody, regardless of, appearance, race, class, whatever. It's just, if you are lost and big outside and you need to find a home and you share things with us, then we should share the community with you.
Yeah. I think I've said before how I think part of that is the fact that we identify as outsiders allows a lot of white people to not have to examine the internalized racism that comes with being a white person in America. And we think that that's just not there because, well, we're weird and people pick on us. So, I can't possibly also be doing the same thing. And that just kind of, because it's unexamined, it allows it to propagate.
It is easy to take that outsider status and try to parallel it to the lived experience of significant oppressed minorities, which, while there is an aspect that can give you empathy, it's not by any means equivalent. You need to use that experience as, hey, I have a glimpse, a little tiny grain of what these oppressed minorities will feel. And because of that, I need to empathize and feel for them, not, well, I was excluded and I went through just fine, so you should too. That's not the lesson to take from it.
Exactly.
So just going back to my very quickly, my little advice for 2022. Very much was thinking along the same lines as both of you, and just the idea of when we're having discussions online to remember that a lot of the nuanced elements of a conversation get lost when we're talking online and engaging online. Like you were saying, Trey, try to be more charitable, be curious rather than accusatory or defensive. We'll have a healthier scene. When it comes to gothcore, I'm concerned not necessarily about gothcore itself, but when a year or so after we started the podcast, the like pastel goth, new goth, ghetto goth, health goth labels started popping up, and we devoted a lot of time to trying to distance goth from those groups because we were worried that Trey wasn't on the show. I was worried that goth would die by 1,000 cuts, that like these were going to splinter goth and do a bunch of smaller infighting groups and shut down our clubs and ruin our communities. And a lot of people were saying the same thing online as well. None of that happened, obviously, and shouldn't be surprised because every decade there have been similar things, similar trends, whether they're mainstream fashion trends or subcultures. Cybergoth is the easy thing to point to, or within our community or tangential subcultures. And goth is still here. It's reflective, it's dialectical, it's sarcastic and self-deprecating, and there's a diversity of culture. And so I think what I'm more worried about with gothcore are the never-ending flame threads online and a few loud voices screaming at each other, because I don't think the actual fashion trend will have any kind of long-term impact on our communities. So that's what I would say. And then also, I'm just excited for more music. There's been so much good music. Goth is becoming and needs to become more diverse, more intersectional, less dominated by a single kind of person. I think we're seeing that in the music, and that needs to be reflected in our clubs and scenes as well. So
another aspect of gothcore that concerns me a little bit is it seems to be sort of an accepted outlet for potential racist sentiments as well.
Yes.
Because it is usually aimed at goth rap and or the as you mentioned before, the ghetto goth subculture. It's usually a mixing of urban styles or music with goth styles or music. And there can be a place for that. That's not to say that, where most people complain is that it's, say it's the goth rap. It's basically just a rap song with some darker elements, but it's primarily a rap song. And that's fair. That's not goth, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a legitimate crossover. You can't have goth with rap elements. We experienced a little bit of that in the 90s with the brief rise and fall of trip hop. Was as close that, it was the closest merging, I'd say, of goth and an urban style. Industrial has a long and storied history of interactions with rap explicitly. So it's not that distinct and not that separated from our culture, and we can't use that as a way of focusing our racist urges onto something that's more insulting to another culture and precluding that culture from having any ties in, especially since goth from its outset had a lot of influence from African culture and music beyond, I've said it before, but beyond just being rock music and punk music, as well as dub and reggae. So, and, system culture and all that came out, that birthed the same thing that birthed rap and hip hop, came and helped birth goth. So we're not that far from cousins. There can be some crossover. There can be some interrelations.
Yeah. And if you're not one for it, if you don't like that particular genre or subgenre within the goth scene or a particular style, then you don't have to like it. But you don't have to have any hateful sentiment, any racist sentiment. And that's not needed. It's not needed at all. If you don't care for it and it's not your style, that's fine. I have a lot of friends that are very much cyber goth, and it may not be my aesthetic, but I'm not going to knock them or not stand next to them or just start berating them. It's not doing anything to hurt you. So stop. What are you trying to prove? I think it's just attacks. And Trey, just like you were saying, the outright just people making comments. Social media can be so toxic. And what you find is disturbing. It's absolutely disturbing. So it's just people kind of forget where things either originated or, just like Trey, you touched upon it, even Danny, you said, education is key. It really is. It really, really is. Just like with anything else, educate and learn. It's not that something that has not been seen before. Everything seems to recycle itself. Look, the 90s are coming back. The 80s are coming. It's all recycling itself. So education and asking questions and just dialogue, everything. I'm in such an agreement with both of you. There's progress, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I hope that's what this year brings.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also, metal it's not goth, obviously, but there has been hip hop and rap crossover. I know I've talked before on the show about how much it bothers me when there are certain people who make, like in previous years, it had been mumble rap and that kind of thing. But these genres that are associated with minority groups these white people making that their main thing they're angry about.
Oh, don't forget the whole Cholo Goth kerfuffle that was going on
Cholo Goth,
a while ago.
I know our friend Ellen on a previous show said something to the effect of that, goth culture takes so much aesthetically and musically from the diaspora of Black culture that it's insane that, I mean, it's not insane. You see it happen all the time, but to turn around and like try and exclude Black people from participating is, you're like clearly have so far missed the point of what's happened so far. But anyway, so we're well into the episode. Why don't we this is about veganism, if you didn't know. Nosferatu, I like to ask our guests to talk about what brought them into goth, what that journey looked like at the beginning, and then a little about maybe why that connected with you, why you stayed part of the community for so long.
Yeah. So just really touching about what Trey said is that a lot of people that are welcomed or find themselves in the community are outcasts, are loners. I discovered it, well, my mom she kind of laid the foundation in a way. So I grew up, one of the first songs I remember was Peekaboo by Susie and the Banshees. And then I remember listening to Depeche Mode. Now, I don't know if it was necessarily my mom, because I'm Nigerian. I don't know if it's my mom that necessarily knew what the bands were, but she's fueled by music. Like, she loves music. And it was hearing those artists, growing up with, like, The Cure, The Creatures, where I delved more into the music. I was very much into, and I've always been drawn to, death. Like, there's a beauty in it. Anything that's misunderstood by others or creepy, I was always drawn to it because I always saw a beauty or some type of connection. I never connected with friends. So I was always kind of by myself. I always was writing poetry, and anything that was just, the story was very, very much, I don't want to say never had a happy ending, but it wasn't like something where you can read and be like, oh, this seems like it's going to be great. It was very much that of poets such as Poe and writers such as Bram Stoker, and art, like even African folklore that my mom did tell me are very dark folklore stories around the world. And that was something that I loved and was extremely drawn to. And it was when you find yourself being kind of a loner and an outcast. I was not considered Black by Black friends because of what I like to listen to. So because I was not, unfortunately, someone that fit that stereotype, I felt very alone. And I don't feel like I connect with, I don't care for rap. I don't knock it, but it's not something that I was listening to. I do, and always gravitated towards rock. I always gravitated towards new wave. That was just where I've, gravitated towards traditional African music, of course, always, and ambient music. And so I was about 12 years old when I discovered the goth scene, and it was an immediate love. I felt home. It didn't feel like, well, this is something new, but I don't know. Maybe I fit into it. Maybe I don't. For me, it was just, I'm here. Like I found a place that was welcoming. I found a subculture that through everything, through sound, through words, through poetry, through our architecture, through the beauty of clothing, through everything, it didn't matter, what my race was. I was like, this is my core. I've never left the scene since I was 12. And even now, you have people that would phase out. I never phased out. My mom thought it was a phase. No. I've got 2 kids and they are baby bats right now. So no. And my home is exactly, it's the extension, So it's something that, I live and breathe, just like, I do being an African, individual. I live and breathe my culture. This also is my culture, regardless of those who may say otherwise. this is also where I am, where I belong. So it was just the discovery kind of started by, of course, when you're young, normally music is what you're listening to. Or you're like, oh, this sounds nice. But it was more than just, oh, this sounds cool or this sounds nice for me. It led to further discovery. And then as soon as I was able to say, this is what this is, this was home for me. So proud elder goth here. I've been in the scene for 32 years. So yeah,
that is beautiful.
That's what brought me in. And my little ones, it was immediate, they gravitated. I have a 7-year-old and 8-year-old, and my 7-year-old it's just an instant grad. Like, he's been since birth, just pretty much like my little mini me, and it's really
that's so cute.
So yeah, I'm so happy to be a part of it, and also educate. But that's how I got into the scene.
Yeah.
Always us loners are those that feel that we don't really belong. And I did get teased a lot too, because the first thing that came out was, oh, you're trying to be white. What does that mean? Because I like other music outside of what we're supposed to listen to. That's like telling someone who's white, oh no, you're just supposed to listen to country and rock. Being, oh no, it's just hip hop, jazz, and rap. You can't listen to anything else. Music doesn't know any color. So why do I have to be bound by what your stereotype is? So it was hard, being a part of the thing and being around other Black individuals, being around other white individuals. I was trying to be something that didn't, I was trying to be another race, or I was weird, or, outside of the subculture, it was hard. But those that were also a part of it, it was easy. It was, we found each other. And when you're in areas like I'm here in the South, if you spot another goth, you're like, oh my God, and you're in I feel safe now. But yeah, it's I've been in it for years, and it was, of course, other things like a lot of us, mental health played a key, that also kind of led me towards the subculture. Lots of ways to express. I am a musician as well, so of course songwriting also led to it. Finding out, the other thing was, like, I guess this kind of bit along the lines of, like, especially if, and I don't know if it's really, others will say that, but of course, I guess as you get older within the scene, there's other things that you connect with within it that you may have just not discovered or may have not necessarily paid much attention. This is always seems to be a culture where there's always, you discover as you keep getting older. It's just something that you may have missed. And then when you do find it or connect with it, there's a joy. I guess I would say, like, a very kind of, yeah, there's a joy. I don't know if it's not necessarily sadness, but there's a joy and an emotion that no one else, unless they're within, can express or feel or get.
No, that's beautiful. I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. So what about veganism then? When did you start becoming interested in going vegan? How did that develop for you?
When I was 16, one of my friends in high school, we were like the odd couple. She was very hippie, and we still talk. We still talk to this day. We always joke that we were sisters from other mothers. And she was vegan before I was. So I remember going to her house one day after school, and she handed me this glass, and it's strawberry milk, right? So she was like, I want you to try this. And I was like, okay. She's like, you're not even going to question what this is. I said, well, I know you're not going to kill me. So, all right. It was very, very just like, yeah, I trust you. So I drank it, and I was like, oh, it's a strawberry milkshake. She was like, it's soy. And I was like, huh? She was like, yeah, it's not animal. I was like, you're joking. She was like, no. And so she showed me, it was from GNC. It was called Spirutine. I don't know if they still carry it, but it was a soy-based drink. So it was the powder. And when I was looking at it, I was like, this is not from animals. She was like, no. And she was like, it's good, right? And I was like, yeah. So then I started to kind of do some more research, finding out how long it takes for red meat to break down in your body. What it does was very disturbing. Coming from an African family, beef, chicken, goat, those are some staples that you find within our dishes. And I immediately, after doing research, within about a week, I went vegetarian. So I stopped eating red meat and stopped drinking milk and stopped eating some dairy. Like I was still eating eggs and cheese at that time. But I went to a concert. All of the band members are animal activists. They're vegan. And after the show was done, I was heading over to the merch table and I noticed that there were a whole bunch of girls like closing their eyes or walking away from the table and, crying or like whatever. And I'm just like, it's just hoodies and shirts and pins. Like it can't be that bad. And as I walk over there, as people are starting to clear, there is a small television that's playing videos of factory farming and the horrors. And I could not look away. And at that point, I said, it was a cold turkey for me, like, pardon the pun, but it was easy for me to just say, I will not do this. Like I cut it off right then and there. But then I also was like, this is not just about being now what's termed plant-based. This is about something completely different. And it was immediately that I started looking into animal advocacy. I stopped eating any meat. I have not owned any animal fur leather since I was about 15. And it knew that it was more about, we had our dog at the time. And the first thing that popped in my head was, would I, if your people, and I'm not, you have vegans sometimes that can be the crazy ones. And I'm not one of these that's like going to look at someone who's wearing fur and is going to throw paint. I think I get what you're getting at. Yes, it is wrong. For me, I agree that it's wrong to wear the animal because they're not creatures that do not feel pain. So I don't understand, there are videos of showing that animals that are crying, they are begging to get out. You're in captivity. They feel pain. They're saddened. They are frightened, so I, being extremely, extremely feeling a lot of things and being highly empathic, it breaks my heart. So I immediately was like, I can't do this. What can I do to help? What can I do to bring more awareness? What can I do just besides not eating any animal byproducts and animal meat itself is a big thing. But I was like, there has to be more that I can do. So that's when it became not being, as this current term is, because they've now made it quite clear the difference between being plant-based and being vegan. It was locked into one, and it's not. Plant-based is where you are just not eating any animal byproducts, any animals, but you may still wear fur. You may still wear leather. So you're just really it's a lifestyle change with your diet, which is good. Ultimately, I've noticed that as I educate, because I'm a speaker as well, and introducing people to what this is and the differences, it ultimately does lead, not everybody, but it leads to people doing more research and normally watching movies such as Earthlings, What Health, and it opens their eyes. I would never say, hey, I'm vegan, sit down and watch this disturbing film. You're not trying to make someone sick. You're just trying to open their eyes and let them see something. Whether they take that and they say, I'm going to make a change, you don't know. But you just kind of want them to see this is where your food is coming from. This is what your burger looks like. It had a face. So I think that was my journey. For my dad, he used to joke and he was just like, oh, you can eat the backyard. And I was like, okay. No, and they thought that it wasn't going to last very long. And I kept going and I stuck with it. I mean, it does make me happy to know that in some way that I'm making a difference somehow. Now, there is even more to that because going vegan at that point when I went at 16, I didn't know what intersectionality was within the community. So when someone says they're vegan and they're like, I'm vegan for the animals, the environment, for Mother Earth, and for conservation, I am all that as well. However, you cannot not acknowledge the pain and suffering that are happening with people of color, that are happening with LGBT individuals, that are happening with immigrants that are here, that are tending to the farmland, that, there are other things at play here that are things that are happening to women. So it's not just pick and choose. Surprisingly, within the vegan community, you get intersectional vegans and vegans clash.
Really?
Oh yeah. They don't care. They're like, well, the animal needs more. I'm like, wait a minute. No. Everything that is happening is important. Their life means something. You can't just say that this is more important, or you want to turn a blind eye. That you can't.
Yeah.
Do that. So there's a lot of, like, in the community, it's still, pretty bad. But veganism first for me was a change in, like, okay, I'm going to eat better. I wasn't an unhealthy individual, but I'm very tall. So you would look and not really think much of it. But when you're kind of having things where you're just like, don't feel good, stuff like that, finding out stuff like really disturbing things too about what happens to your food, it'll make you think, and say, okay, I want to reassess some things. And so it became at first a health thing, just by a little introduction of a glass of strawberry soy milk, and then turned into an immediate going vegan. It's been fantastic. I do find a joy in introducing it to people, and introducing meaning like, hey, here's a suggestion, or this is something that you can do that's great. Because I also look at it as like, yeah, there's so many things that you can do, and it's more accessible now in terms of where you can go. At that point, it was just Whole Foods. That's it. And Whole Foods is, AKA your whole paycheck, because it was expensive.
Yeah.
So now I'm really glad to see that, there are more places. It's more where you can go around the corner. So like Kroger's and Walmart and Aldi's, and Trader Joe's, and pretty much anywhere. You can go into a dollar store and find something that's vegan. It's more accessible in some areas. I do think that more urban areas need to have access, because there is unfortunately this thing where it's like, oh, well, it's a bougie, it's white people thing only. That's changing, because there are more faces within like the African American community that are embracing it. But there was some resistance, because it's like, oh, well, this is just white people stuff. So now I'm trying to go that way. And I'm like, anybody can be healthy. But also it's like, what can you find in those communities? And what do you normally find in those communities? Never a health food store. That's not the first thing that you find. So it's changing now. It really, really is. And so just trying a soy drink led to bigger and better things in regards to being a vegan and expansion.
So bringing that all together, then you kind of have Goth and the Raw, right? Because we have the Goth aspect. We have two other things that personally I have found go very often together with Goth communities, which is being queer and being vegan. So can you talk about how Goth and the Raw started and what you're fulfilling and accomplishing with that?
Yeah. Goth and the Raw started in 2015. I was pretty much raw vegan at that time. And for me, I was looking at a lot of faces or representation of veganism or foods. And I'm like, anybody can do a green shake or a smoothie. I would like to see something that's kind of reflected of my personality. Because there are vegans of all kinds that exist. And just like you touched upon, veganism is not uncommon within the Goth community.
Yeah.
And I was like, I kind of want to see, if I was on the receiving end, what would I like to see that's different? Yes, rainbow food, eat the rainbow. I totally agree with that. Eat all the colors of the rainbow when it comes to fruits and vegetables. But I'm like, I kind of want to see something different. So at that point in time, we had moved from Michigan to Georgia because my family members were here. And I came up for a new opportunity. And I was in the kitchen. And I was this is when Instagram kind of started to get, big.
Mm.
And I would do a lot of, cooking and baking and preparing things and just started kind of snapping it with my phone. So because I have an eye for like artistic, layouts and certain things like that, I was just using my cell phone at the time. And it was my spouse that said, you should go ahead and start an Instagram. I said, nobody's going to want to see this. He was like, you should do it. So I said, okay. And the farmers market down here is the Cal Farmers Market, which is huge and it's amazing. And I have, I love black radishes and, fruits and vegetables that you will not find in a conventional market, because I wanted to show, hey, there's not just, red peppers or green peppers. There are chocolate peppers. There are purple peppers. There are black radishes. There are dragon carrots. There are so many other things and colors that you don't see. And, always drawn to that darker color, like the darker aspect. And what people fail to realize is fruits and vegetables with darker pigment in their skin, like the darker concentration, holds more antioxidants than other colors.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm taking this and I'm shooting all these dishes and getting really creative, and I was like, well, what do I call myself? So we're in the kitchen just kind of tapping around, staring at like things. And I'm like, I have no clue. Well, he goes, well, you're goth and you're raw vegan. So why don't you do goth and the raw? And of course, my happy neurodivergent self just screamed out of nowhere, this is brilliant.
It is so good. It's like, it is the best name.
Thank you. And he was like, yes, you should do that. And I was like, and it stuck. And it allowed me to merge both worlds, because I said, I was really sick and tired of seeing a lot of faces that I didn't reflect with. A lot of vegans that you see on YouTube, they're, I'm in Maui and Hawaii and I'm in the sun and here's the bracelets and uniforms and rainbows. I'm like, I am cemetery, spiders, give me darkness and fog and let me sit and just dwell in my feelings. I'm still, just because I'm different than you in that aspect, doesn't mean that as vegans, we don't share a common ground. It needs to be where in the community, there needs to be other faces. And I was like, I'm not the only vegan who happens to be goth. There are so many of us. So I said, I'm going to do what I love, given the fact that, I wasn't, because I moved down here, so I wasn't modeling at the time. I had already left New York. I, also am a, magazine editor. So it's putting that artistic, food is a canvas. It's a blank canvas. So I was like, I'm going to take inspiration from various things that I love within the subculture and place it into the food, display it. So if I'm doing something like let's just say because baking, so a ciabatta bread, or the biggest thing that people are doing is like making vegan eggs. So making the yolk using it was just yellow. So using like nooch and rice powder. I was like, let's up it. I'm going to make a beet version. So using and making just beautiful red yolk in the center of the egg white over easy. Taking things in terms of making breads that are, ciabatta breads or croissants. And everybody's like, oh, black food. It's like, okay, so you're not using ink. I'm not doing it for a shock value. If I'm adding colors, all colors are the natural colors to foods. Let's experiment and see what can be done. Look at so many things that you can do with food. Everything. If an artist has a brush, and that brush can be used on any canvas, and mine just happens to be food. So when I decided to really further go into this in the direction I was going, I never expected to catch the attention of MGM and United Artists releasing For the Addams Family. I never intended to catch people who may not be within the subculture, but they love what they're seeing. And they're just like, this is so cool because you don't see it. I am not limiting where you have to be goth to like my stuff. You have to be goth to make any of the dishes. No, I just want you to not, you have to have a respect for all things. So, I mean, I've come across some very hateful individuals within the vegan community who have sent me direct messages earlier on when my Instagram was really starting to grow with Goth and the Raw. One was a fitness person who said that, this is a joke and, there's no such thing. You can't be, goth and all this darkness and applying this is a joke. I don't know who you think you are. To someone who said, there's a YouTuber or personality, her name is Fully Raw Christina. And she was like, how dare you? The woman sent me a message. How dare you? You're an embarrassment. You need to be more like Christina. Oh yeah. It was the most, I was reading them and it was like, okay, so one came a day before, just ignore. Then this one followed up next. So I made a post about it on Instagram about diversity is a great thing. And if you as a vegan are looking at someone's exterior instead of the real message of why we're vegan, you need to reassess why you're vegan. Just because I may not like the same things or look different or be a different race or anything like that, you cannot come and be abrasive and rude and hateful to people just because it may be something you don't understand. When I tell you that the response from the goth community to that post was the support was overwhelming. Then came people who weren't, but who were vegan. That was overwhelming. I had a lot of people that were asking, what are their on their Instagrams? I'm going to go pull it up. No. You want to be better than them. I'm not going to stoop to their level. You just want to show that we are here. And now look, we've gone from where you're wanting to attack in terms of, this type of we don't exist to so many people now who are maybe who may have not been vegan or are now embracing it. So like Casey, Homicidal Homemaker, just in regards to the faces of where you're seeing this kind of aesthetic and food and people that are part of this who are displaying that we may be different, but look at you can't think that we're not going to get anywhere because we don't fit your mold. So bringing something like this, which is like, I get to go ahead and be myself and show everybody that, hey, I am goth. I'm also vegan. I'm also queer. I'm also African, which is what you don't see a lot. And it's been great to see it just, over the years. It's been work, but over the years to go ahead and see it accumulate to my cookbook being worked on and getting ready to film my very first show and getting picked up with a network. I also public speak to give advice and show people and really teach about that, diversity is key. Like I really speak highly about that because there was something that happened that there was a network that I was going to be doing my show and Pride was happening. And one of the individuals that brought me in and highly recommended me to that network, it's a vegan network, by the way. And the owners called me because he said he wanted to put something up to celebrate Pride because I was not the only queer personality with the show. I have a show that was developing, but there was a personality there that was already on the show. And one of the heads of that particular network decided to refer to me as, that black trans thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So after he was livid and went off, and there are other people that found out and they ended up leaving in light of it. And I was featured in an article. My recipes were also up there. And I went and found that they had removed it. So there was no trace of me whatsoever.
And
floored. So we did not know that they kind of had this sentiment to honestly being what came across as anti-LGBTQ. And I was very, very angry. And that, I mean, it's funny because when I did the Vice, she was laughing, and the journalist Ruth, she was like, well, you're kind of touching all bases here when you're talking about everything. I was like, it's not that I went ahead and was like, I'm going to pull out of a hat what I'm going to identify with today and speak on it. It was just happened that I am all these things wrapped up in this vessel. And if I see and I have experienced something, or I see others that have, I'm not going to not say anything or address it. You can't stay silent. You can't. Yeah. So when it's talking about anything such as racism, when it's talking about, you know, the racist sentiment, lack of diversity within veganism, lack of diversity within the goth culture, in the scene, lack of acceptance, not having, I mean, there's so much to address because I connect with it. Mental health is a big thing. I'm not afraid. I do suffer from depression. I suffer from anxiety. I am autistic. There's a lot where I was bullying. There's a lot of trauma. I am a sexual assault survivor. There's so much that you have to be able to talk about. And this has been, I know it's like, well, how did veganism lead to all of this? Because in some manner or form, one of these other topics pops up. So I can't just toss it aside. So Goth in the Raw has led to being something that was just in a kitchen to something that is opening doors for other areas to share and help educate and teach and speak and be a voice for the voiceless, not just animals, but for women or survivors, or, you know, young LGBTQ individuals, or people who just feel that they need someone to speak or hear for them. You know, that's where this is all going. This year is opening where I'm going to be able to connect with more people through any platform. And just like you said, when you have white people within the goth community that have a platform, be it a YouTube or, you know, or anything, a podcast, you use what you've got to speak and address things. So I'm doing what I know best, and is speaking through food, but also speaking through experiences, and maybe more people that can connect to either or both, or all of them.
And it's been so incredible to see all the things you've been accomplishing over the years. It's just amazing. The more publicity you get, the more recognition you get. You deserve all of it and more. I guess this is an exciting episode for me because this last year has been my sort of working towards transitioning into veganism. From I started off as vegetarian at the end of 2020. And so then this last year I've been working towards cutting, you know, animal products and everything out.
Nice.
And I think, you know, there have been a few reasons for that. One of the main reasons I think is I talk about on the show a lot, but I advocate for understanding the self and the world as something that is co-created, made together with the organisms around us, rather than something that's meant to be controlled.
Yes.
So once you start with that idea of or other organisms other than humans having agency and having an active role in bringing forth the world, and sort of seeing them as, like you were talking about with emotions, but being able to use tools to make decisions and to react and engage with the world around them, rather than the way that I sort of was raised, as seeing animals as just mindless beasts that were made to be eaten. When you have that shift in perspective, there's not really any sort of ethical logic work you can do to get around justifying, you know, eating animals. So and then also just sort of trying to be mindful of my impact on the impact of my actions on the environment. And so I guess with food production specifically, it's the meat industry is like a huge contribution to greenhouse gases, and it uses all this land and water that cause other environmental damage. The meat industry greenhouse emissions are equivalent to the exhaust of every car, train, ship, and aircraft on the planet, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
That is a big deal. And then when you start looking at, so if I started looking at, the impact of other types of farming, and there are other things you can do, like a lot of fruit that you would buy from the supermarket is imported from the UK. So that has a carbon footprint, right? And then there's some, I think, like mushrooms and almonds have a high CO2 impact for different reasons. Some of the like easy to get, like Impossible, whatever, and Beyond Burger, those aren't great for the environment.
No.
And so that's why, so there's a complexity there, but then you do things like you were talking about, like sort of moving towards buying from farmers markets. And because that also, like you were saying, cuts out that human element where you have farm employees that are, a lot of times undocumented immigrants, and so they're being exploited. So if you can buy local, or even William Faith, who I always use as an example, as a part of the Chicago goth scene, is a big proponent of permaculture, or even like learning to garden, grow your own things, that kind of stuff. So there's next steps there. And like, what was the other thing I pulled up? Oh yeah, soy is people give soy a bad rap as like having a big environmental impact, but it's actually 70% of the soy that's grown is being used to feed animals that we're bringing into existence to kill. So it's not always like you really have to pay attention, because I guess that's the thing with statistics, is you can kind of make them look however you want, but there's a lot of nuance and complexity there that you kind of have to pay attention to if you're really interested in it. I also don't want to overcomplicate it, because I don't think going vegan solves every ethical problem, every health problem, but it's a step in the right direction. It's sort of like you make incremental steps. You demand, just like you would demand ethical treatment of Amazon employees or something, like you do the things that you can to make the world a little bit better. I'm not involved with vegan communities like you are. It seems like vegan communities are more generally activism oriented than, like, you could say the goth community is. But so I think those kinds of things are important, and taking those steps in that direction, I think, are important. So this is exciting for me to get to learn as well. Everything you've said has been fantastic and very helpful. And so, but I've known so many goths over the years that are vegan or vegetarian, and I wasn't. So it was just like this, and they were always the coolest goth. Like, I know this is a stupid thing to say, but it was always like the cool people who were vegan. So it's nice to be here, is I think what I'm trying to say. So, but then on that note, let me ask, what tact do you take when trying to convince others to change their diet, or especially when, I think you brought this up earlier, when the diet can be part of like cultural difference, or not cultural differences, but a religious practice or a cultural heritage. How do you try to get people to start thinking about why they should change their diet?
Yeah. So hitting on the cultural aspect is, I think, a good place to start, because, like I said, really a lot of ethnic cultures, let's just go here with Nigeria. Like, for example, you would find that really our eating habits are not very meat heavy. We have dishes that do have meat. However, you don't necessarily have to have it. A good idea would be jollof rice, which everybody knows. Even if you're not, you either had it or somebody that has, or it's quite common here. And it's, in Nigeria and Ghana and other parts of West Africa. And jollof rice normally contains maybe beef or sometimes chicken. And for my mom, when I went vegan, she kind of started to assess different things to put in it to substitute that. So if she didn't put the meat in it, it would be just coconut rice, like a coconut rice, or a version of jollof without the meat. So it was just more of the coconut milk base, the tomato base, and then just all of the vegetables. I think it's easier now with culturally, because we're mostly, I guess I would say, like mostly plant-based, more plant-based than we are heavily on meats. Sometimes fish, like stockfish, is something that is quite prevalent. But mostly, like a lot of our things, like akara is a bean. It's like a bean cake, a bean bun. We have mai, which is a bean cake. We have egusi, which is a vegetable-based stew. Pepper soup, which is sometimes with or without meat. So if it's not there, it's not a total loss to people who are like, oh my God, I don't know what I'll do. I always, because incorporating too, even with Goth and Raw with cooking, I do my own take on Nigerian dishes, vegan takes on them. And my mom is even learning like amazing things to do with mushrooms that she's never done, like with pork. And so she's absolutely adorable because she has a very heavy British accent as well as a traditional Nigerian accent. And she will call me to announce what she's done with mushrooms. Like, I don't know what she's like I don't know what it is, but she is just as happy, and I am happy for her. And it just is cool because she herself is like, this is what you can substitute. So it's little things like that in terms of watching. In terms of introducing people that may or may not be like, or it's the healthy way to do it. I always, when I go to grocery stores, my spouse would always laugh because normally there would be somebody who you can tell is interested or in like the natural health food section. And they're looking or they're trying to say, well, maybe I'll try this. And of course my ears would perk. And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to try this. And this is vegan. I'm going to try and see if I can stay away from meat. So then I would go over. My spouse would laugh and stay back and be like, I'm just going to watch because this is not the first time this has happened. And I'll go over and just talk. And they will tell me, I'll ask, I'm curious. I'm like, if they're looking at something, they have no idea how it may taste or what it is exactly or what to do with it. I'm happy to offer tips, not like pour it down their throat or force it, like, get it. I don't work for the company, but it's just like, this is a really awesome substitute for this. Then I remember I was talking to this one lady and she was very sweet and we ended up keeping in touch. She said, I've got to get more healthy and I want to, I got to stop eating certain things, but I really, really love my red meat. I love myself a steak. So I said, okay, I've got a question for you. And she was like, what's that? I said, I always give this kind of scenario and always want people to think. I said, when a lion hunts its prey, what's the first thing that they do with that kill? What do they do with it? She looked at me kind of puzzled. I said, they take it over to the pride. And what does the pride do? They immediately eat it. And she was like, well, yeah. I said, but do you know why? I was like, and she said, well, no. I said, when air hits something that's dead, it's going to gray it. That meat is starting to decompose and rot. It's dead. So it's going to start to gray. There's no oxygen running through it. So it has to be consumed immediately. She was like, I get you. And I said, so does it make any sense for the meat over there to still be red and good for a year, 2 years, 3 years? She got stunned quiet. And she said, I never thought of it like that at all. I said, the chicken that's there, that looks super huge. I said, if you go to Nigeria, they're tiny. Farm-raised chickens are not gigantic beasts. Okay? They're not. They're not what you see on the shelves. When they're farmed naturally, they are small because the feed that they get, or grains, they're getting it where it's not something that is chemically altered. They're not being injected with anything. There have been reports of, and I don't understand it, but it baffles me. But then you kind of look at the state of health in the United States, and of course, you've got to keep Big Pharma going. So you would find reports where you had former butchers that were like, yeah, the meat is gray. There is a paint solution that they would use to paint it and put it back on the shelves. Or there are chemicals that are added to make it look that big. It's not that I want for people to not, if you're consuming, know where you're getting it from, but please reassess maybe looking at other alternatives. If someone embraces like a meatless Monday, I get really happy because baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
It really, really does make a difference, because that one little step where you're like, okay, Mondays I'm eating meat free will turn into 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week. And then soon it could be extended where you're just like, I'm totally plant-based, to them possibly going completely vegan, because it just leads to more and more research. And for those, the other thing I understand though is like, not everybody can be plant-based or vegan. I think when it was like, when people are like, oh, I can't go vegan, again, they really broke down just recently the difference between the two. Because everybody was like, well, when you're vegan, it's the same thing as plant-based. And that's not the case. Mm-hmm. So you do have people that for medical reasons, they may have an allergy. If you're not going to show them what the alternative is, there are people that have allergies, they're allergic to nuts, cashews, peanuts. So what is the alternative? Sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds. You look for things that for those who may have allergies. Some people can't take tofu. Some people can't take nutritional yeast. Some people are allergic to particular fruits and vegetables. So you can't slam people who are like, I want to embrace it, but I have this allergy, or you think, oh, you're making an excuse. That's why you're just, you don't want to go plant-based, or you don't want to be vegan because of this. No. Some people are allergic to certain things. So what is our responsibility is, what do you do? Introduce them to what the alternative would be. If you can't have this, here's an alternative. But some people just still, that they can't. Another thing is that people are like, oh, well, it's too expensive. I will say that in lieu of things, being in a pandemic and there have been shipping shortages, some things have gone up in price. They have. One of the things I learned when I became vegan is shop around. You will find that one item at one store may be expensive, but if you go to the next, it is $2 cheaper. Take advantage of clearance. Start learning to make things. Reduce eating packaged processed things. It's really simple to bake bread. I used to think it was like difficult. I was like, oh my God, it's a tedious thing. No. And it's just simple ingredients. There's no gums, no additives, no preservatives that are going to have it where it's on a shelf to keep. Yeah, you need to consume it within a time period, but there's nothing in there that is not supposed to be in your body. So just like with everything, education is a big thing. Understanding why they may or may not be able to, and not knocking them for not being able to. If they're saying that they want to, but they don't know where to start, they don't know where to look, they don't know where to go, offer amazing resources. The good news is that it's just expansive on the internet to find amazing resources for starting, going into being plant-based or going into being vegan. So you have to listen to that person and take in what may be their pros and their cons to becoming. And then if they feel that they are lost or that they don't know where to start, or is it possible that it's just not for me, then you have to respect that. You can't shove it down their throat. You make it more difficult or impossible for people to even want to embrace or learn or come to our side, per se, when you are making it where they are slammed for not consuming something, or being attacked for maybe taking in something that is considered healthier. For example, soy. Soy is not that bad as long as it's not in excess. My little ones are vegan. They have soy. They love tofu, but they don't have it every day. You just have to make sure that certain things are in moderation. But in some of these groups that I've been in, I've had to leave them in like Facebook groups, because the first thing that someone will say is, oh, well, I'm new to veganism and I really like tofu, and I use that as a substitute for this. People will come down their throats. Soy is bad. Soy has estrogen.
Oh boy.
Don't be male and eat soy. Oh my God, you're gonna become I'm like, I'm done. I'm done with this. Stop it. Then you want to say, well, you got to do this, or alkaline water this, drink this. I'm like, stop it. Here's what you should think of. When I went vegan, I was like, I want to make sure that I'm putting my body in a better health. And then it did become, again, immediately for the environment, for the animals, for preservation, for doing my part, and of course, reducing your carbon footprint. Then when I had little ones, because I had a vegan pregnancy, I had little ones, and I would immediately look at them and I'm like, if I'm not going to put this in my body, why would I put it in theirs? It's interesting because you have a good and a bad to talking with people and listening to what they have to say, the cultural differences. Sometimes some people are like, well, if it's not with what it was originally with meat in it, it's not the same. I'm like, oh yeah, now what? You removing fish doesn't mean it is not a Nigerian dish. You removing that animal out of something does not mean that the sky is going to open up and you're going to get swallowed, and you have disobeyed, you have turned your back on your culture. That is not the case. In Nigeria now, there are vegan food festivals now. Oh. And I'm like, yes. Like, I'm so happy. I mean, given the fact we're mostly plant-based, but as cities are becoming, the main cities are just like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, so it's building, more people are coming in, you have people for business, for school. So you're getting that community is becoming heavier and heavier. And it's really amongst young people. So to see like vegan festivals, food festivals now in Nigeria is amazing. You can also go onto Instagram or YouTube and see a lot of vegan Nigerian personalities, chefs, a lot of people who are not vegan within the Nigerian community, but make alternatives. Like they're like, today I'm making this, but I'm making one without meat. So it's for those communities or those background, those cultures where not having meat in something is not necessarily something that's unusual, is beautiful to see. For someone who's here in the United States who immediately thinks it's meat or nothing, when you introduce something to them, they're floored by it. And you're opening up their minds and their palates. And with that, you start to open up their hearts, because they realize, by me not consuming this beef, by me not eating beef or eating a steak, I am being a part of saving an animal. It leads to so much more. So in terms of talking with someone who religiously or culturally, you have to listen to them first. You can't just throw out, well, this is what you need to do. That doesn't work. It's immediate conflict, immediate tension. You're not going to get anywhere because you're coming off as if you're better than them. That's not what you're supposed to do. You listen and then offer anything that you possibly can, and then start helping them in that direction. Just with what you can, resources, or maybe a food, here, try this. Here's a great dish. And then that helps. But it is sad sometimes to find those that are immediately like, well, if you don't do it this way, then you're not doing it right, which is something that has to stop. But those are the way that I approach individuals culturally or who have any cultural issues or religious issues or don't know where to start or want to go that way. That's always how I approach it. Sometimes I have been met with a lot of like a pushback, but mostly it's not even due to like cultural or religious. It's sometimes from parents. Yeah, like that have kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't, there was a lot of incidents. They were in the news where there were parents that were vegan or they had become vegan and they were starving their children. So they had young children that were 2 or 3 that ended up emaciated or died because they didn't do their research. Kids are different. You can't just say, I'm good with a glass of almond milk. So are you. Yeah. They are growing. What? You can't do this.
Yeah.
It's neglect. So I got slammed so many times with like, your kids are vegan and, they're going to be malnourished and, how dare you? And I was like, okay, I did my research. I know how much protein they're supposed to have for their age. I make sure they meet that mark. They meet it with everything that they need in terms of nuts and seeds and plants and beans and fruits and vegetables. They eat like football players, and they are super tall. They are fine. They are not emaciated whatsoever. They are the healthiest little things. And it shocks people when I tell them that, they're vegan. And they look at them and the first thing that they think of, because you tell them you're a parent and your kids are vegan, they think that the kids are starved. It's like their face reads like out of nowhere. You see like a neon sign over the head saying, call CPS. It's like, wait a minute, that's not the case. Then they see them and they're shocked because they are fed properly. If you do your research, you have to be smart. If you are a parent, if you're someone who is vegan and you have children, you must realize that just because you may be able to eat like a bird doesn't mean that your child can. You have to make sure that they're getting everything that they need. And it is possible with the vegan lifestyle. It's not impossible at all. You just have to make sure that you're doing the right thing by giving them what they need. If you can be fine with 30 or 40 grams of protein, which is real low, by the way, but I'm throwing out something. So let's say 90 to 100 grams of protein a day. Look at what your child needs. Does your child at this point, what do they need? 50? 30? Make sure that what they're eating throughout the day meets that protein requirement. Have it be a marker. Look at what their caloric intake is supposed to be. Kids are active. They're going to burn off all that energy. But it's fuel. You want to fuel them like you fuel yourself. They are still growing. So it's all about, again, listening to them. And then hopefully having that dialogue where everybody learns, you're able to take and then say, okay, I've heard what you said. Let's see how I can work that and how I can help. If you can, fantastic. If it's not meant for them, you may have just given them something to think about if they're able to tweak it for them. But you can't force it. You can't. So I always come with that approach of always saying, putting myself in their shoes with anything like that.
I'd like to chime in, but Trey, I realized I kind of skipped over you. Would you? Well, I mean, you can respond to any of that, or tell us about like your personal journey with food. There was a lot there that we could kind of
I'm sorry.
Chat about. No, it's perfect. I mean, you're making my job easy.
I mean, my journey with food is not really that dissimilar to yours, Danny. I mean, I cut out red meat from my diet probably several decades ago. That was one of the first things that I cut out and went to pretty much all chicken and a little bit of fish many, many moons ago. And then had been tapering it off pretty much since then. I mean, my diet has predominantly been based around rices and pastas to begin with. So I had a lot of starch vegetable matter in my diet that made up the bulk of my diet. So I wasn't necessarily as indebted to animal products on a day-to-day basis. That being said, though, I've always also been fairly picky around vegetables. So going to an entirely plant-based diet had always been a bit of a hurdle to me, because while I would eat predominantly non-animal based products, I would have to force myself to diversify that to get the nutrient basis of a healthy balanced diet, by figuring out, what plants I would like, what things I would not like. I also had been a fairly frequent user, and still am, of supplements just to fill in any gaps. Not going crazy with it, but the odd multivitamin here or there, or looking at targeted supplements if I know I'm missing a particular nutrient, getting that specific multivitamin, or making sure I have a food source that has some degree of fortification that's going to be bioavailable. So yeah, most of my life has been, I've said for a long time that I was not really vegetarian or vegan, but if you looked at my diet, it was mostly vegetarian most of the time. And the only reason I would only go so far as to say vegetarian and not vegan was because milk has been, or had been, my primary drink since I was a kid. I've been a huge milk drinker. I don't tend to drink juices or waters or sodas as much. Milk was always something I had with almost every meal. And dairy is still, as I've gone down more of the vegan path, probably my biggest struggle. Though I've found plenty of ways of getting around milk as a beverage. I've experimented with a bunch of different ones, and I've kind of gravitated and sort of settled on oat milk right now. And I've had pretty good results with that. So I'm happy with oat milk. For the most part.
Oat milk is so goddamn good.
It is good.
I love oat milk.
It is good. I mean, almond milk was probably the first one that kind of grabbed me, because I tried soy many moons ago and did it in a bad way of doing it, because I tried sweetened soy and I hated it, like the vanilla flavored soy. So I had that sort of bad experience and had this bad connotation with soy milk because of that. So I was looking for anything but soy, and was trying a bunch of other ones, tried the hemp milk, and almond milk was the first one I kind of liked. And then I looked at the environmental impact of almond milk and said, I'm going to find something else.
Yep.
And that's when I gravitated towards oat milk, which seemed to be an easy sell for me because I also eat a lot of oatmeal. That's pretty much my breakfast all the time. So oats in my diet is a normal thing. So the fact that oat milk has that oaty taste to it, not really a big deal to me. So yeah, I definitely gravitated towards oat milk, and use that pretty much everywhere. I always generally use milk in, when I'm cooking things. If they need a cream base or something, I'll use oat milk. Yeah. I'm still not fully, I still haven't fully gotten away from dairy, because there are a lot of products that I like with my pasta sauces. I tend to prefer strongly the cream based, not heavily, but the creamier ones. And I've done some stuff to try to modify standard red sauce or standard sauces to make it more creamy without milk, but I haven't found good alternatives yet. But I'm still working on formulations for that. And then I still have the holdover from childhood of my good old blue box macaroni and cheese.
I got some alternatives for you there.
Okay.
Coconut milk.
I don't
not the one that you
milk.
get like in the cold section. Wait, not the one in the cold section, but the one that's in can.
Oh, I know. I do a lot of Thai
Yes.
food. And one of the things
Yes.
I don't like about Thai food is the coconut milk. I don't like coconut milk for random reasons. I don't like coconuts in general.
Yeah.
But I am very averse to coconut milk.
What coconut abused you when you were a child?
Well, I mean,
willing to give them more
milk,
shots, but yeah.
Oat milk is good too. Or if you want to, because like I know what you're talking about, about cream, doing substitutes for like cream-based sauces. And normally for that thickening, like way to make it that kind of creamy yet thick like that, normally is using coconut milk or coconut cream. I make Alfredo sauce using cashews, not cashew milk, but cashews. So I do like a half cashew, half oat milk combination.
For
and
me with the mac and cheese, it's more the cheese part rather than the milk content. Because I already add oat milk to my macaroni and cheese. It's getting a powdered cheese.
They're the only brand that I've come across that's fairly good. I don't rock with Daya anymore.
Yeah, I haven't had great luck with Daya.
Yeah.
They're okay.
Yeah, they're Bonza.
Okay.
Bonza is great. They're vegan and it's chickpea pasta.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've had their pastas. I like their pastas just fine.
Yes.
But I haven't had any other stuff.
Try it. Like it's really good. My little ones are pretty much obsessed with it. So I tried it and it is really, really nice. I was very surprised because powdered and looking for vegan ones can be kind of difficult. Annie's I do not support anymore due to the parent company. I just discovered some things.
Well, they're not necessarily really vegan. Most of their stuff I see is organic rather than vegan. So there's still cheese and dairy, but they're quote unquote organic. And I don't like the taste of it anyways. I've tried it and just never liked it.
They do have a few. They did come out with a vegan mac and cheese, but the parent company is not a vegan company.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you have a lot of these companies that are like, I'm going to ride the bandwagon.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And I was like, nope. So I discovered Bonza and I've been pretty happy and stuck with them. There's another one, but they are expensive. And I can't remember the name of it. They weren't that great. But Bonza has come out with their mac and cheese. Their pasta is fantastic. And their mac and cheese is really good. And then, of course, the other alternative, is, hey, make your own. But it's really good. Bonza, if you're looking in store, it's very good.
Okay, I can give them a shot. Yeah, that's pretty much been sort of my journey. It's been a gradual one, and I'm very much on the philosophy that every little step is an improvement. It's not about all or nothing. It's not about, just having this slight little bit and you're ruining the whole thing. It's just every individual meal, every ingredient you can replace with something that is more ethically sourced, more respectful of the environment, knowing about supply chain and how things get from point A to point B and all that stuff, that sort of holistic view. And every small little change you can make is an improvement and is a step in the right direction. So I've always, when talking to people, I try not to have them get caught up on this sort of all or nothing thinking of you're either vegan or you're not vegan, or you're vegetarian or you're not vegetarian. It may be an end goal, but as we're moving as a society, as a planetary community, every little step you can take is a step in the right direction. So I try to embody that myself. And then as I discuss with other people, that's the same way. I mean, I just, I'm not really an evangelist for veganism, but if people are talking about it, I'll say, this is what I did. This is why I did it. This is why I like this. You don't have to do it that way, but I'm not going to be adamant about, no, I can't see meat around, or I'm going to shame you for eating meat. If you eat meat and I'm going to eat out with you, I'm going to find an alternative. And as you've said, it's getting easier and easier to find those alternatives.
Yeah.
These days, almost every restaurant is going to have quality vegan and vegetarian alternatives that aren't the stereotypical, well, I guess I'll just get a salad thing. So it's great to see the world moving in that direction. It's making it easier for people like myself who wanted to just do sort of a gradual transition and not totally overhaul their diet. So one thing I did want to ask about, because something I've been doing a lot of research in, and I'm curious how you address it with other people, are with the dietary change of going vegan, there are known nutritional deficiencies that just don't come from plant-based foods, that are really only easily accessible from animal-based products, B vitamins being one of the primary ones. What do you do as far as discussing with people, how do they take care of their nutritive health? How do you do like nutritional analyses, determine if you have any deficiencies, advice on supplements or taking targeted supplements for known deficiencies, things like that?
I advocate for supplements.
Okay.
I definitely do. Yeah, just like you said, I am totally one. It irks me when I hear vegans say, "Oh yeah, like you can just totally you can meet your mark of what you need with this." I'm like, yes and no. because it's like you need a large quantity of this per day to hit what you're supposed to meet with that particular nutrient in your system, that particular vitamin that you need. And if you look and read at some of these labels on foods, you're only getting like 25% of your daily intake by eating this. So it's like you can't, no, you have to really look and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to get some of this by eating like, a whole packet of greens, which let's just say you cook it. That wilts down to a whole bag becomes like a teaspoon. You need to really think, because if you cook it, it's going to be smaller, and then you are kind of cooking out some of those nutrients. So
it depends on if you consume the water, because usually, if you're cooking it in water, the nutrients leach to the water, and as long as you consume the water, you're still going to get it all. But most people don't. They just discard the water, and that's where all the nutrients go. Exactly.
So it's like you're better off if you're eating it raw, but you're still not getting everything. So I take supplements. I absolutely take a multivitamin. I take one that's targeted, and it does help. So I do advocate for a good supplement. Sometimes, you really have to kind of look and see, because sometimes there's just ones that are absolute rubbish.
Oh yeah, now you have to do your research, because there's supplements that, well, usually the ones that say they're 500% of everything are the ones to avoid.
Yep.
Not only because it's pissing out money, because you're not going to be, you're not going to actually be using all those nutrients. It'll be
correct.
You get the 100% or whatever percentage over that your body actually gets when you factor in bioavailability, and the rest just goes in the toilet.
Yep.
And you paid for that. So, but yeah, doing the research on, bioavailability, what ones you actually need, what ones you don't need, the whole myth that rose in the 70s of super dosing for health, especially around vitamin C, has been wildly discredited at this point. And it's just not the case. It doesn't help you to take extra. Again, it's water soluble. Your body uses what it uses and discards the rest.
Yep.
But you can also run into overdosing situations with some of them as well, especially some of the ones that are frequently missing in vegan diets. Some of those ones that are harder, like your vitamin Ds and some of the Bs, those can cause problems if you overdose on them.
Yeah. So, you did touch upon pretty much anything and everything, being that keyword is researching. But I do definitely advocate for a good supplement, one that is, just like you said, targeted. Because just like you said, like that, you don't need the one that's 500. It's just going to come out of your system. It's going to be just like you said, you're wasting your money.
Expensive pee.
Yep.
Exactly. Very expensive pee. So, but yeah, I do advocate for supplements. Absolutely.
Okay.
Part of the thing though is I do think it's a little bit unfair, the amount of attention on, if you're vegan, you have to be hyper aware of your macronutrients and stuff, because my diet was shit when I was like, I would eat chicken strips and cookies all day. Right. And it's like, there was a science educator who's a neuroscientist a while ago that was saying that the most important thing you can do in your diet is to have a vegetable every day. And that's going to provide you a lot more better health and longer life and that kind of thing. And I know so many people that are meat eaters that don't eat vegetables at all. But yet the fear is like, well, I can't change my diet because I'm going to be unhealthy, or I'm not going to have enough, vitamin D or calcium or whatever. When in reality, from when I was looking at what I was eating, when I started thinking about this, it was like, I'm like, everybody should pay attention to what they eat and what they put, even if you're not vegan, like, what constitutes a healthy diet should be something that you take some time to look into. And so it's not a misnomer, but it's a little bit of a kind of used as a scare tactic almost sometimes. Like, well, don't go vegan because you won't be healthy kind of thing. And that's not true.
Yes.
When it comes to, sort of convincing other people to change their diets, I'm also on the same line of thinking where if you have a bunch of people that make, replace their meat meals with something else 2 times a week, that's going to have a huge impact, because it's difficult to say with anything, but specifically about diet, it's difficult to say, I need you to completely change everything that you eat next week, every single day. Like, it's hard to do that, even with, for snacks, for example. I've been trying to cut back on sugar and processed foods, because like I could eat, vegan cookies all day and still, like, that's not good. And it's hard to do that. Even if I go months without having sugary snacks, I still will get cravings, and it's easy to get into a cycle. So I think it's much more effective to start with, and it is so easy to get substitutions, even if you're eating at fast food or you're just going to like Target or something.
Yeah.
And, for me, as far as the like religious or cultural thing, when I kind of mentioned this, when I was a kid, part of the Christian culture that I was in had, they would reference that, whatever that biblical verse where God showed Moses all of the animals that he could eat, as this sort of justification of like, animals are created to be used for consumption. And I think, well, now that I'm not a Christian, I feel like the idea that the best that God could come up with for a sentient ecosystem requires one organism to consume another is absurd. But besides that, like, religion is generally flexible as far as the way you interpret your faith.
Mm-hmm.
So there are Christian vegans who like use the Bible to support veganism, right? So that's a conversation to be had, kind of going back to when we were talking about the goth thing for this year, right? It's like, tell me about where you're at, what you think, and let's kind of talk through that. The videos of like the factory farming, those never worked for me, because they're so horrific that like my mind would just shut down, because I could not engage with that level of emotional trauma to make any kind of difference. So for me, the shift in my thought was most powerful in situations that came up organically, sort of like spending time around pigs and cows, or watching videos of, people with farm animals, where it's clear that these are entities that think and feel and have emotion and form bonds and experience joy and feel pain. And that sort of, for me, is like, how can I interact with this pig and see how intelligent and emotional and excited it is, and then think like, yeah, let's make some more of those so we can murder them, kind of thing. So that was for me like how I engaged with changing people's minds, changing my own mind.
One thing I wanted to touch on real quick, kind of tying back in with our discussion earlier about the introducing it from a cultural standpoint when there's some cultural resistance. One thing that I don't remember hearing mentioned, but especially in cultures in the US and around the world that are either poorer cultures, rural, subsistence farming cultures, meat, while not a major part of their diet, is an aspirational part of the diet. This idea that meat is this luxury and it's a sign of being successful is to have that little bit of meat with your rice ball or with your jollof rice or whatever you're having, that little extra bit of meat is a sign that you've made it. And trying to turn that, I think, is another very difficult part, because as you had mentioned in Nigeria, it's already a very heavily, almost already vegetarian culture. And I believe Nigeria also has this effect, though, where meat is something that's aspirational, right?
It
somewhat traditionally, at least.
Somewhat traditionally. Well, for example, there was a celebration that I went to. They brought animals, for this particular event because of the significance.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for me, I walked through the wrong door to witness them slaughtering it. That was traumatic. But it was at that point where it's like, okay, we are having this ceremony, so we're bringing in 3 cows. Like, we need 3 cows. And they right there, they did kill the animal, and they were preparing it, and cooking it and everything like that. There was a whole and things like that. In aspirational, in terms of it's the more that you have like the sign of wealth,
Mm-hmm.
that does ring true. It definitely depends. It would definitely be more like in some areas of like villages that you would find
Sure.
that.
Yeah. Again, like the subsistence farming areas rather than the urban
Yeah.
centers.
Yeah. Normally, with not all, but most cultures around the world, where you're going to like out of the cities
Mm-hmm.
and more, like you said, into the farming, rural, like the villages, is where you do find that. So you do still have that prevalent pretty much everywhere. You will find that in Nigeria in the villages. Yeah. And it's just like you said, right then and there, you're right. You can't be, it's going to be difficult because it can be seen as, once you have this, it's a sign of wealth, because that's what's seen, is that if you are wealthy or well off, this is what you must have with your meal, that type of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So it does become very, difficult, but I have not myself run into that type of situation or scenario.
Okay.
But if I were to, I'm not going to deter them, because it would be more difficult, because it also depends too. The other thing culturally is, well, if they're seen as not eating where there's meat as a part of their meal, what will others say?
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes where it's not, the gravity of it is not just them. It becomes their status. So it's really difficult when you're dealing with more of like looking in the villages and that type of area to try and do that, because it could definitely, and still may not as much, but still be seen around the world, depending on what area that is, as it being a form of being a sign of being wealthy or having that, or so it's
yeah,
it's
I mean, I
difficult
definitely
area
see
to
that
put
in the U.S. plenty in poorer communities, urban and rural poorer communities, where meat is the treat. You get, you've been good, you've saved up, and get a nice steak or some chicken in your normal
And
red beans and rice.
well, in America, though, I think it might be a little different, because so like I would never. There might be two different situations. I would never tell an indigenous culture like, you need to stop killing animals. That's not my place to do that. I think in America, the this is my treat thing is, and again, I could be wrong here. Please tell me if you think I am, but I think it's less to do with a cultural thing and more of a systemic inequality, where you have like food deserts and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And it is, you can't have good vegan food or vegetarian food. And so it's not an individual responsibility thing. That is a failure of, usually white supremacy, like redlining stuff, or just capitalism situations people are forced into, where they can't like for me, the first time I ever had, this is a tangent, but real quickly, I went in, I think it was 2012, I went up to Wisconsin to visit some friends, some DJ friends and some goth friends, and they were all vegan. So that came up at some point. They told me about their favorite vegan restaurant, and on our way back home, we went to this restaurant, and I had never had anything vegan before. So I didn't know what to order. We went, and it was like this, it was like an ultra hipster kind of vibe place. But I had it, and it was like the best food I had ever had in my life. And I was like, I was completely shocked, like, wow, vegan food is good. What the fuck? But that's a example of like, I was privileged to be able to have that opportunity to do that. So that's more of I think a failing of the country we live in.
Oh, it is, which is why I was situating the culture in cultures of poverty. So more of a classist based culture thing rather than cultures around the world, indigenous populations, not that, but the the endemic culture of poverty, and when the trappings of wealth, or what is perceived as the trappings of wealth, are viewed in such an aspirational way. And I know that in a lot of those societies, meat is given that primacy. It does have a lot of things like what you were saying with food deserts, and just the availability of those products, which is what makes them a luxury. But at the same point, the vegan food, which is why it's maybe a cognitive dissonance here, is that at least in the US, the less and less so, but still vegan, vegetarian diets are also viewed as their own kind of luxury, but not that sort of aspirational luxury. They're just viewed as expensive without the acculturated joy of going out and getting, lobster tail or fried chicken or whatever your sort of passion meat is. So yeah, there is that disconnect between,
my passion meat is ass.
I know.
Sorry.
I know. That's, yeah.
Can't eat enough of it.
Yes, we know.
Butthole is on the food pyramid. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. We can't go a whole episode without mentioning. So we've gone a long time before that even got brought up. So I mean, I think this might be a new record.
There were so many times I wanted to interject, and I was like, "This is rude. I'm gonna keep my mouth closed."
But
oh my gosh.
But yeah, there's that disconnect between this vegan vegetarian thing being perceived as expensive and a luxury in and of itself, but not the one you grew up with. Whereas the thing they're telling you to avoid is the luxury you grew up with and the aspiration that has always been part of your life. And I think that can be a big barrier in a lot of these areas. And just the fact that it's that much harder because of food deserts to even get those vegan alternatives and have that experience like you had, Danny, of this amazing vegan meal. Just it piles on obstacle upon obstacle to get an attitude towards veganism or vegetarian, or a healthy attitude towards veganism and vegetarianism, to make inroads into these food deserts and poorer communities.
Yeah. You just, I mean, I won't take up any more time, but Danny, you kind of hit it out of the park in terms of going to some place. And that's the other thing that it was seen early on is, veganism is for hipsters. Like, that's just the total community that you really saw. It's like, you were a hipster. Like, that's who you saw that was eating avocado toast, and veganism was associated with them. And, and people
or dirty,
get
smelly
shocked.
hippies, if you go back a little bit
further.
Yep, dirty, smelly hippies.
Yeah. And it was just like, that's all that you saw it associated with. And then, you have friends, or, like my mom would say, "Oh, this is what vegan food tastes like." And then unfortunately it's like, oh no, like that type of thing. So it is where either it's a shock because it's, number one, expected. It's associated with just that type of crowd, which is wrong. So when someone who's not part of that or has never experienced that then eats something, like comes into it and sees it, they don't realize that, just like you said, like visual representation is everything. If this is all that they see, so people are going to get a bad taste in their mouth. That's originally how it started out. It was like, oh, you're bougie, you shop at Whole Foods, you're vegan, oh my gosh, you are wearing, suspenders with your jeans, lattes, I'm better than you, like, and it was bad. It was bad. It's gotten better. It's gotten better because it was just horrifying. You didn't, at a point in time, it was a little, if you even mentioned that you were vegan, immediately people wanted to hate you.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, you're one of those people. Well, so there's so many from talking about like how it affects people in different areas, or people who are experiencing, or the images that are given that they see firsthand. Like, that's what they associate. So when you have that type of thing locked in, be prepared for, it's, yeah, I mean, it just hit. As soon as you said that, I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. Because it's like, so this is what it tastes like. You get either left with a good taste or a bad taste, or both sometimes. Because it's not necessarily the food that rubs off on you as a bad thing. It's the community or the people that are sometimes associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been growth, definitely. I definitely agree with both of you is that, in terms of trying to see if an indigenous culture is going to change or trying to get them to divert, that's a no. As someone who still has, comes from, a continent full of still dating back indigenous cultures and their practices. No, I could never, ever be like, oh, I'm vegan. Well, you strip this, and no, we don't eat that anymore. To that, I mean, there's moments and times and places where you're like, no, it doesn't make it where they are doing it unless you have to really think, on what you're trying to impose.
All right. Well, I think we're at just about as long as we should go. So we definitely could talk more, but maybe, we'll have you on for a future episode. I would absolutely love to have you on again. But if you can let us know, I will have all of your, as many as I can, links to where people can find you in the show notes. If you want to point any people anywhere specifically, or let us know maybe what you have coming up this year, what people should look out for, projects, that kind of thing, please share all that with us.
Yeah. So coming out, I'm working on my cookbook that hopefully is going to be out by the end of the year. I'm working currently with my publicist with that. So hopefully there's some good news around the corner with that. Working on my first season of my show, actually filming the pilot this summer.
Hey.
And we're looking to see... I'm really excited about it because there's going to be a lot of diversity in terms of the guests. So you're looking at vegans from, vegans of different races and from the LGBTQ community. I've got some amazing guests and musician friends and just so many people that people can watch the show and be like, oh, this is really cool, or I can connect with, or people within any scene, or all especially like the alternative community too, can be like, oh, this is cool, or they know who this is, or they're just like, wait a minute, there's more like this. I'm not the only one. This, like, you're seeing something that's more mainstream and not a gimmicky, so I'm really excited.
So exciting.
To film that and get that out. That will drop this fall. That's what we're looking at getting out. And then those are the two projects that I'm working with right now. Hopefully expanding to Goth Fest was supposed to be taking place next year, but we're keeping really a close eye on the pandemic, so we don't know if it will happen next year. We're hoping, but for me, safety is everything. I'm not going to jeopardize people their lives. I want to make sure that everybody's able to enjoy themselves, without the fear of worrying about something happening or someone getting sick. So, we're taking the precautions. Hopefully, Goth Fest will happen, which is, of course, the Vegan Goth Food Festival. If not, then we're going to look at for 2024. But for this year so far, I'm also looking at some more collaborations with hopefully some various films and TV studios.
So exciting.
Keep sharing what I love to do.
And gothintheraw.com for the main hub for all that. And
I am on Instagram and soon to be expanded, soon to be on TikTok.
Oh, thank you so much. This was really wonderful to have you on. Thank you again for chatting with us.
Oh,
yes,
thank you for having me. This is great.
So this episode we are reviewing the album Lore by the band The Blue Hour. I'm really excited to share this album on the show because I can't remember the last time we've reviewed a 4AD-esque band. And I think that style of music doesn't really get much of the spotlight in general anyway. So this band the members have stated that their influences are Coil, Current 93, Brian Eno, This Mortal Coil, Dead Can Dance, and Cocteau Twins. And they are a duo from Seattle, Washington, who released their first album in 2001. So I was actually pretty surprised that I had never heard of this band after I saw a review of this album and looked it up and then saw that they had such an extensive back catalog. But before we chat about our feelings of the album, let's play a song off of said album. I don't know if you had a preference, Trey. I was thinking Doubt the Stars, but I don't know if you had a favorite song that you would...
I mean, Doubt the Stars was probably my number 3 track. I like the second track a lot, but that wasn't necessarily as representative of the album as a whole. That was a little bit more of sort of an industrial-y feel, which I did really like the mix. No, Doubt the Stars is a good track.
Like I said, I think this is maybe always has been, but at least right now, an underrepresented genre. I don't really hear this type of music played anywhere other than a couple places, which would be Sarah's Nocturna Tuesday and Shimmer. But I mean, that's just Chicago. It could be that other scenes have nights for this style of music as well, or mix it into their nights. I never really see it in the stuff I look at, either Twitch streams or clips of, clubs people have posted to TikTok or YouTube or wherever, or set lists I've seen. But
yeah, this style really did seem to fade out at the turn of the millennia, I think. Because I don't listen to or haven't heard much post 2000, maybe a little bit right at the borderline there, but after 2000 that was in this sort of ethereal goth 4AD sound. I mean, we definitely had other bands that did sort of, elements of it, some of the world beat stuff from Dead Can Dance, and then, full on ambient, sure, but not this sort of mix that seemed to have its real height in the late 80s.
And I miss 90s. It. It's really, I mean, there is something, it's otherworldly, right? And that fantasy element of goth has always appealed to me, whether it's the Victorian romantic goth sort of side of things, or what else? Just this the vampire fantasy. This has always seemed sort of uncanny in an interesting way that feels like it transcends to use a band name, your Mortal Coil in some way, and that's always been appealing to me. So
I mean, one of the remixes was part of this Mortal Coil, so it's fair to...
Well, I was going to say, there's a couple guest musicians. One of them is John Fryer from this Mortal Coil and the Joy Thieves, and then Peter Newton, who was, I think, one of the first members of Clan of Zymox in the early days, and then he's also gone on to do a lot of work with 4AD as well. So I think that was a really nice treat to have two sort of veterans on this album. And I think just sort of comes with being a band that's been around for that long, where you build those relationships over time. The album itself is gorgeous. I mean, everything I just said about it applies. The term I was going to use was dreamy and creamy. But I really did like the album. It kind of puts me into that trance that I crave at times. The lyrics they've got the lyrics on Bandcamp, which is nice to be able to read through those. They're really poetic and really well constructed, and a lot of them are reflective in different ways that resonated with where I am at in life. But it's a kind of lyric writing that I don't see very often anymore, and it could just be the kinds of music that I've been listening to, but it has that mystical, romantic, and enigmatic sort of poetry structure that was a big part of music I listened to growing up, and the way that I liked to write lyrics when I was writing bad poetry in my bedroom. There's also a pagan influence as well on the album. Some songs are explicitly about paganism in some way, and I think that lends itself nicely to the kind of music, the vibe of the music, and the sort of mysticism that it embodies through the sound and the tonality and the instruments used.
Yeah, and that theme was pretty core of the sound of the the predecessors that they're harkening back to in the 90s and whatnot. Were also heavily into the pagan influences and things like that.
So overall, the album it's really well put together, mixed and mastered. I thought everything was well structured and sounded beautiful and magical, and it was great. It spurred me to start listening to their back catalog, just putting on some songs here and there. And for me, it was I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5.
Wow, That is a
Yeah.
stunning recommendation there.
I really liked it. I think, it kind of came at a point in my life where I needed something like this, which helps. Also helps that I haven't listened to this genre in a long time, not to diminish my 5 out of 5 rating, but just to contextualize it a bit. So it was really hit me in a powerful way that I needed at the moment. So
I guess another thing that, I don't know if you got this from it, but interesting, and not something you usually say about a goth band, but it was kind of almost cheerful a little bit. It wasn't quite, it wasn't like
hopeful, I think,
bleak and desolate like some things can get, especially when you're going into these more sort of, well, goth in general, but then the more ethereal and dark ambient leaning genres can get a little bit oppressive. And, sometimes I really enjoy, in fact, oftentimes I really enjoyed that, but it was nice to get a little bit of a break. This reminded me of, some other bands like Bel Canto that had a similar feel where they're still gothy and dark, but not that sort of oppressive dreariness that can really sort of bog down and make something a little bit more tedious unless you're really in a mode to listen to that sort of thing. This had a good mix of feelings and emotions. It wasn't just a one note thing. It would have bits of hope, bits of despair, bits of anguish, bits of joy. It was really playing with a whole wide emotional spectrum.
Yeah.
Which especially these days, with all of us having our emotions tamped down by being isolated and alone, is a little bit more comforting.
I completely agree, because that was that complexity of emotion. I didn't, it was kind of unspoken, but yeah, I have felt a lot of sort of monotone emotion, just kind of gray, kind of how some people feel when they're coming out of depression and they're on antidepressants, which just sort of flattens everything.
Right. Or the stereotypical lithium mood for manic depression.
Yeah. And so feeling that throughout the album, there are parts that feel more playful or childlike in a way. And that was, I agree with you.
Great. As far as I also really enjoyed it. I mean, when Danny introduced me to the band, they pretty much specifically said, "I'm really excited to introduce you to this band because I think you'll really love them." And I always take that with a grain of salt because I always am wary of anything being overhyped and getting me overly excited, and then I'm usually disappointed because I got so overexcited. This band didn't disappoint. I thought this was a really, really good album. I really did enjoy, like I said, the complexity of the emotional, the depth of the album. And of course, it is that sort of late 80s, early 90s, ethereal goth, dream pop, 4AD, shoegaze type sound is right in my wheelhouse. That's what was really big when I first started getting into the goth scene. That's what I really gravitated to early on. Really got into my Dead Can Dance and Faith in the Muse and Cocteau Twins, and all those bands are really more in my wheelhouse than, say, the traditional goth rock, death rock stuff, which I like, but wasn't at the top of my, this is really what's grabbing me and bringing me into this whole subculture. So it is great, like Danny said, getting to hear this coming out again with some more modern production and a little bit of those modern styles creeping in there, which I found really interesting. The band was a real good mix of instrumental qualities. They had a good variety in the album. One of my favorite tracks was the second track, which is not really representative of the album. It actually had a little bit of a sort of industrial vibe going with the sort of ethereal vocals, which I always will associate with Collide, which was my first band that at least their first album really opened my eyes to that sort of blend of things. Cause I've been in this goth scene for a little bit and going to clubs, and I'd heard goth music and I'd heard industrial music, but they were always, two separate things that were played at the same club, but not really merging with, at the same time. And Collide sort of opened my eyes to this idea of mixing that sort of ethereal female vocals with a harder edged industrial instrumentation. So the second track had that, but it was almost the only one. I think there was one other track towards the end of the album that kind of evoked that again, but for the most part, a lot of it was more along the, as Danny said, with their influences, Cocteau Twins, This Mortal Coil, things like that, that more 480, very ethereal sound with hints of some world beat, but not to the degree of a Dead Can Dance or a Faith in the Muse, which is bringing much more of the sort of world music influences. This would have hints of it every once in a while, but it wasn't as heavy as some of those bands. But that is more like what This Mortal Coil and like a Current 93 were doing a little bit more. They did have a lot of sort of neoclassical influences in it, where they had a lot of ones that were really, a couple of tracks were really stripped back with just some strings, some piano, and then some light synth backing with very sparse drums, which were nice and sort of evokes that 90s era vampire aesthetic, with, you know, the sexy Louis playing the piano with a string quartet kind of feel, which gives you that very romantic goth, neoclassical feel, which I also quite enjoy. I also really enjoyed the singer. She had a very diverse voice. Early on, I mean, I already mentioned a little bit the collide sound with that first track, though. That first track actually had a couple of other, I heard a little bit of Kate Bush in there, which was really interesting for me. Had a lot of that very high childlike voice.
Yeah.
A little bit of the Cranes in that as well. Again, that sort of very innocent childlike vocal quality, but more Kate Bush I felt than the Cranes. The Cranes tends to be a little bit even more childlike, where Kate Bush is more dynamic but high pitched. So I felt it had that more dramatic flair. And then there were a handful of tracks that really reminded me of David Bowie's last album. Some of like in the choruses of like Black Star and things like that, where he did this sort of monotone voice with a heavy chorus, where it sounded like multiple, you know, voices all doing a similar monotone line. There were a couple of tracks that in this album that had something that really reminded me of that. So I got a little bit of a sort of 2000s or late era David Bowie vibe on some of these, which was really interesting as well. But yeah, a really good mix. There were some tracks on here that I didn't really care for. Unfortunately, the two that were remixed were not high on my list. They were okay, but they reminded me a little bit more of like Enigma from the 90s, which I liked at the time, but it kind of feels a little bit dated, a little bit new agey. But some of that was just, I found the drum beats in those remixes to be a little bit less inspiring, a little bit more, I guess they weren't really grabbing me. The music as a whole was pretty good, but nothing was really grabbing me. But yeah, they did have a couple really interesting tracks. And I found they were scattered throughout. So it wasn't like there was a gap of several tracks that were like, nah, I'm really not getting into it. You might have one that is not as good, but then a track or two later and you're back up. Oh yeah, this is really good. I'm really getting back into this. So it did mix it well throughout, at least as far as the tracks that I liked versus ones that I was a little bit less enthusiastic about. So it kept my interest throughout without having a big lull, or it wasn't too front loaded or having all the tracks at the end and having to slog through the beginning. I wasn't finding a need to skip around at all. But yeah, so overall, I really enjoyed it. I'd probably give it about a 4.5. I won't go full on 5, but it was a really good album, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm also going to go back and check out some of their earlier albums and see what else they've got in their catalog.
All right. Well, it's now time for Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
All right. right. So I have sort of a dual suggestion, I guess. I'll try and run through this real quick. I picked up a couple books on Christian death recently, which is a band, obviously, I enjoy. I've never been a huge Christian death fan. I didn't pay attention to. I didn't go out of my way, let's say, to learn about Rozz or the other member, their music history. My biggest introduction to the sort of story of Christian death came through the book Phantoms, The Rise of Death Rock from the LA punk scene, which, if you know, is the phone book sized tome of interviews that came out a couple years ago. Otherwise, I don't know too much about Christian death. I find in general the people who are the loudest fans of Christian death are insufferable and some of the worst parts of the goth community. But good band, interesting. I don't worship at the feet of Rozz or anything like that. The first book that I got was from a Kickstarter, which you can buy. It's the more expensive of the two. And it is called Christian Death, Only Theater of Pain, which doesn't help for trying to look it up. But it's a photo book, primarily a photo book by Edward Culver, who was sort of a prolific photographer of underground bands in California in the 80s and probably onward. I don't know. It's a very physically large book, which is great because the photos in here are really high quality. You get to see a lot of the detail of the venues that are being played and the makeup that people are wearing and the clothing they're wearing. And so that, I think, is really nice and valuable. I like this better than I have a photo book from nothing against Mick Mercer, but I've got a Batcave photo book of his, and it's a more traditionally sized book on like regular paper, where this is glossy paper, and it makes the images a lot more pleasant to look at. And then there's a not insubstantial amount of interviews with people and descriptions and stories. I haven't read through all the way through either of these books. My biggest problem with this one is that a lot of the information in here, for example, Steve Darrow's interview, basically everything he said, I already read in Only Theater of Pain, in Phantoms. So there is new information in here, but a lot of it kind of I got already from that compendium, which made it less appealing. But if you haven't read that book, then obviously this would be, and you're interested in Christian death, this would be a good place to get it. There's also, images of lyric sheets and handwritten notes and things like that. So a nice, interesting, if biased, but whatever. It's a kind of a love letter to Christian death, I guess. So you got to expect that. So that's a good book. The other book that I got that I prefer actually is, and again, I haven't finished reading either of these, so take that with a grain of salt, is called Rozz Williams, In His Own Words, Christian Death and Beyond by Dave Thompson. And this was published by Cleopatra Records. So if you buy the book, it comes with a 45. I think mine is a red vinyl. And it's got halos and this Mirage on there, which is pretty neat. And it's actually cheaper than the other book. So that was a nice little inclusion. This, I think, is very well written. What I've read of it so far, at least. It is, and actually funny enough, in the beginning of the book, they mention how when they're talking about what they want the book to be, they specifically say that there are a few people they interviewed for this, but they aren't the standard litany of people that sort of are out there constantly telling the same stories about Rozz Williams over and over and over. They're lesser known, more tangential people that like went on tour with Christian Death for 4 or 5 months, right? And they kind of share their experience with Rozz and the band rather than people who grew up in Pomona and went to the same high school and that kind of thing. The bulk of the book, though, are a series of quotes from Rozz between let's see if I can find it in here. I think it was like at the end of the 80s. But the person who wrote this book was friends with Rozz, and they, at that time period, were talking about writing a book. So they would often sit down and do interviews. So they put Rozz's words together into more of a narrative rather than a sort of like a standard interview. Here's a question, here's an answer. The person who wrote this is a very good writer. It makes the story interesting, right? I don't really like reading books that are accounts of bands because they're usually pretty dry. Like the 4AD book I found, I didn't get very far in there because I found it to be incredibly boring unless you're really, really invested. Yeah, unless you're you grew up listening to 4AD and buying records and that kind of thing. Whereas a book like Cured by Lowell Tolhurst or the Bauhaus book, Who Killed Mr. Moonlight, Bauhaus, Black Magic, and Benediction by David J. Those are, even if you don't care about the bands, they're just so well written and interesting that it's a pleasure to read. Whereas some music books I feel like I'm reading a school textbook or something, and it's just a parade of facts and tidbits and stuff that I just don't care about. So go ahead.
It's also good just to get, those tales of what it was like back in the heyday that, everyone puts on a pedestal, and you get to hear it from the people who are actually there, and maybe make it a little bit more grounded idea of the nature of the scene back at its birth.
This does read as a much more and again, I've not finished it, but it does read as a much more grounded tale. And there was actually this one funny quote from Rozz that I wanted to read because it was appropriate, I thought. He said, there's been so many stories and rumors that I'm not even sure anymore which ones may have been true and which ones not. There's people I've never even heard of going around telling stories about me when I was young, how they were my best friend and we did this or that together. I wish they'd come and tell them to me. Maybe I wouldn't have felt so isolated if I'd known I had such good friends. And if that's not the lore around Rozz Williams, then I don't know what is. But yeah, good book. I'd recommend it. If you're at all interested in Christian death, I would say pick this up. So that's all I got.
Okay. So I'm going to be pretty scattershot here. All right. So I'm going to have a few things to recommend that are going to be a mix. I've got some music, some books, and the books are also a TV show, but I only read the book so far, and a video game.
Oh,
so kind of going with all of our fun things that we usually do. So I'll start with the music selection, since that's sort of the core of our goth subculture, though mine are going to be semi-tangential. The first one's going to be a bit of a novelty act that I just recently discovered, and I love me some novelty acts, but it's a band called Jah Division.
Okay.
And they only really have this one album that seems to be the sort of novelty act, but it's a dub covers album of Joy Division called Dub Will Tear Us Apart Again.
Nice.
And it's a lot of fun. It's a few guys from the New York music scene got together and created this sort of novelty dub covers band. And I love my covers bands, especially ones that are doing unique spins on other music I'm familiar with. And I really enjoy dub music, and it's kind of fun to see dub covers of goth songs, since goth is in itself also kind of heavily influenced by dub. So it's kind of coming full circle.
Mm.
So it's a lot of Joy Division tracks that are in the style of Bela Lugosi's Dead, for the most predominantly dub influenced track that's in the common canon. So very heavy bass, kind of spacey, ambient-y sounds with the well-known Joy Division tracks. I think they're all instrumental, which dub is usually instrumental versions of reggae songs originally. But I don't think there are a lot of lyrics in them, but I'm trying to remember. But it's a fun album. They're on Bandcamp, just Jah, J-A-H Division. But of course, we'll have it in the show notes. So I thought that was really fun. And then on a whim, based on a post, I don't know if Danny, you posted this or if you just shared it with me, but the laments you had about some people crying about how certain modern bands aren't being included in goth, and it's because we're racists, and they mentioned The Weeknd and Willow Smith. Mm-hmm. So I went and listened to The Weeknd and Willow Smith. Now, I'd known both of them a little bit from their big hits, like The Weeknd has the I Can't Feel My Face song, and Willow Smith had the Whip My Hair Back and Forth song, which were fine. I've heard bits and pieces of their tracks, but so I did a little bit more of a deep dive. And actually, Willow Smith has some decent stuff. And one thing I would recommend is from 2019, her self-titled album, Willow.
I think Willow uses they, them pronouns.
Okay. Well, they may. I haven't looked into them extensively. I know that they're come out as poly, but that's the only thing I've seen so far. The self-titled album they put out, Willow, has a lot of sort of a dream pop vibe, which is sort of appropriate given what we just reviewed. Mm-hmm. I wasn't floored by it, but it was actually pretty interesting. So I liked it. And if you're interested in trying out some more modern styles from a quote unquote popular artist, kind of dipping their toes
definitely into, very popular, but yeah.
Well, I don't know how popular they are, actually. I haven't heard that much.
Their top song on Spotify, Meet Me at Our Spot, which is a great song. I'm a fan of Willow, by the way, just to throw that out there. The top streamed song has 277 million streams. So that's a fair amount of streams. 20 million monthly listens. So that's, yeah.
Okay. Well, I would recommend the album Willow. It's a pretty good album. And Willow Smith definitely is experimenting with a lot of styles, a lot of it coming out of the 90s. So they're definitely doing a lot of 90s throwback. They're not, I'm not going to go so far as to say they're goth, and I don't think they would say so either, but they certainly have some influences, and they certainly, if interviewed, would probably claim to be a fan of some bands that we love. So I'd say check them out if you haven't already. Give them a listen. So those would be my two music suggestions.
I will say, since you did mention The Weeknd, I would recommend checking out Dawn FM. I would say The Weeknd has some 4AD influences in a way, but they're kind of sort of filtered through R&B and trip hop and pop. But I think the most recent, I like some of The Weeknd's music, some of it I don't. But Dawn FM as an album, I think is an absolute masterpiece. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in stuff outside of goth with maybe some familiar themes thrown in here and there, check that out. But again, The Weeknd is like a massively popular band, so people probably already know about it.
Yeah, and The Weeknd's been one of those people at the forefront of bringing more of the 80s sounds into the sort of popular R&B style music in the modern era. Which is really kind of nice too.
Yeah.
Nice to hear some of those throwbacks. Not that hasn't been, the 80s has definitely been a very popular throwback source for a while now, where the 90s is a little bit less popular, but still not that uncommon. So yeah, I hadn't actually gotten through all of The Weeknd stuff, so I don't know if I've heard Dawn FM yet, but I'll be getting to it. It's on a list of tracks that I was checking out.
Oh, cool.
I just hadn't gotten to it yet. So I did Willow first because I knew less of their work. I knew a little bit more of The Weeknd's, at least The Weeknd's popular stuff, which I liked, but have never been all that greatly impressed by. But I'll definitely check out the Dawn FM. So moving on to the book/TV show, I'm almost done. I'm about to start the last book in the Expanse series, which is a pretty long sci-fi series that got made into a very popular, I want to say, Netflix show. I'm not 100% sure on that. And I intend to watch the show eventually here too. I usually like to read the book first, as much as I'll sometimes say that I like to watch the movie first, because in my mind, watching the movie or the TV show first means I'll be excited by that and not disappointed by it when it doesn't reach the book standards, and just be more excited by the book when the book exceeds it. But in reality, I tend to read the book first for reasons, but I really enjoyed the book. It's a really good kind of near-ish future sci-fi epic. Humanity is expanded into the stars, but not beyond the solar system. So they're like colonized Mars, the moon, and some of the extrasolar moons and asteroid belts. And it's a whole political conflict. It's been sort of compared to like a Game of Thrones in space, in that there are a lot of political machinations and factions that are fighting over power. And there's some themes of classism and racism a little bit, with people from, who were raised in different parts of the galaxy having significant physiological differences, whether they were raised with gravity or in pretty much zero G their whole life, which will cause significant differences in physiological appearance. And just issues there. And then, it mixes a little bit of that. It was early on with some sort of noir detective stuff. That was the first book. But a lot of sort of space opera, some space battles, but a lot of it is a lot of sort of political, socio-political commentary. And it's pretty enjoyable. And the TV show's been, of course, getting lots of rave reviews too. So definitely be checking that out. But I highly recommend the book series. It's pretty long though. The series is, I think, 9 books.
Wow.
Maybe another one coming out, but I've read, I don't remember if it was 7 or 8. I'm 1 away from the last one that's currently out. I don't remember if there were more coming. But I mean, I can feel it wrapping up too. The books go further than the TV show. The TV show, I think, only goes to book 6 and pretty much is stopping there, I think, which was a decent stopping point. There started a whole new storyline after that, which isn't crucial to enjoying the whole thing. So I don't have a problem with the TV show ending a little early, and who knows, maybe they'll pick up the later one after that. So yeah, recommending that. And then for the video game, going to be another sort of sci-fi space-based one, but it's an indie game that I've been playing a lot of lately, that I got into probably towards the beginning of last year, maybe last spring. I've been playing off and on, but got back into it again when they came up with a new version. It's called Starsector.
Okay.
And it is described as, let's see if I can do this without not talking into the mic. It's an open world, single player, space combat, role playing, exploration, and economic game. Basically, you start the game as, there are multiple different starts that you can choose, but you can kind of start as the captain of either a ship or a small fleet of ships. It's all top down, 2D-ish. It's 3D-ish, 2D-ish, but it's mostly 2D sprite based, top down stuff where you're flying around the galaxy. Combat it can be either tactical or real time. You can stay in a sort of a tactical map and just let the AI control the ships and kind of order groups around, more like a sort of an RTS type thing. Or you can dive in and take control of at least one of the ships yourself and fly that in real time, getting in the mix of things. So it's kind of got a mix depending on how you like to play it. You can be a total warmonger and go picking fights with everybody. You can be a peaceful trader and just travel from port to port, buying and selling. You can create colonies and sort of use them as an economic base as they build up, and you put industries on them. Those industries sell and buy on their own and give you an income every month. It's got quests where you're going out and exploring the galaxy. It's got a bit of a story that's kind of interesting. But you can play through the story, and then after that, it's just an open world, and you can do whatever you want. You can follow the story. You can not follow the story. You can play past the story. It's a really interesting game. It's very, very deep. You've got full control with dozens and dozens of different ship types and hundreds of different weapons, and you can swap the weapons out and load out your ships however you like. You can mod the ships. It's really, really very extensive. And then it's got its own modding community as well that will add tons of additional complexity to it. But it's a fun game. It's really very cheap. It's like $15, I think. So not bad. It can be pretty processor intensive, even though it looks like it's not high graphic, but it's
a lot of stuff on screen.
Especially the space combat. Yeah, when you have a few dozen ships on each side with some of them having fighters, which are leaving even more independent ships flying around. It can have some slowdowns, and it's an indie game, so it's not that full polish. So it can have a bit of a, I'll start getting memory warnings as I play it for a while. Sometimes the saving will take a while. So some kind of, after you played it for a few hours, sometimes have to save and quit to give it a little break to get back into it. But it's really enjoyable. It's really absorbing. There's a fair amount of YouTube content as far as Let's Plays and guides and stuff like that, but it doesn't have that much popularity yet. So it'd be nice to see get a little bit more playtime.
And what was it again? Space what?
It's Starsector, all one word.
Not even close.
Yeah, STARSECTOR.
I will throw in, actually, before I do that, everybody go, if you haven't, buy the winter issue of Auxiliary Magazine, because I'm in it. I have an 8-page interview that I worked very hard on, so go read that. You can get the PDF version for like $5 if you don't want to pay for the print version.
But it's a sexy glossy mag that is reminiscent of those old 90s zines that were popular, Gothic Beauty, and
I did a full Peter Steele centerfold in there, so I did just see this before we started recording that I thought was kind of interesting. There was this short German documentary on a band called Abortive Gasp, which apparently were in the same area of Germany as Girls Under Glass in the 80s. And they had some interesting thing to say, just contextually. I thought this was kind of relevant to the beginning of the episode. The band specifically was I don't think I mentioned this. Is it like a old school EBM, like industrial kind of band? So they said, but provocations like these make access to the Gothic and Darkwave scene, Provocations being the name of the band, make access to the Gothic and Darkwave scene almost impossible for refugees or Muslims. For example, if cultural politics shows no indication of trying to find a solution, the suspicion remains that the scene is actually a closed Christian society with an upside-down cross of St. Peter. And that's in reference to the band being seen as like apolitical and just trying to be shocking. Sort of, they were saying they wanted to do shocking art, but remain sort of independent or apolitical, as if that's a thing you can do. And so they say the documentary holds up a mirror to the possibly overly self-righteous Gothic and Darkwave scene regarding its lack of responsiveness to other social minorities, that's in the article. But at the end of the documentary, what they actually say is that the band only lasted a couple of years because they were in East Germany, but they refused to make any sort of political statement in a very heavily left-leaning subculture, which was, they say Gothic and Darkwave, but it was the industrial scene, right? Although I guess it was all kind of the same thing still at that point in a lot of ways. And they say because the band didn't do that, the scene actually rejected them and they didn't get to play any gigs, and they just stopped making music. But I thought that was just an interesting insight to the inherently political nature of the music that we listen to. A good point they make that, you're making music that's shocking in this underground scene. But if you're trying to remain neutral, you're not trying to find a solution. You're not really any better than the, right-leaning sects of society that are pushing a hurtful agenda, because you're allowing that to kind of be seen as like an equally valid way of being. So anyway, thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our show. Happy 2022. We will be back. Gerard, who is the vocalist of the band Second Salem. He's also a model and a friend, I think I can say. So I'm excited to have him on. We're going to be chatting about a whole range of topics. So please come back for that. But until next time, stay dark. do my whole outro
The
right now.
preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.